Most people think that building a successful business is about having the perfect strategy, the right marketing, the right branding, the right offer. But the truth is, the best entrepreneurs aren't just strategic, they are adaptable. They know when to stay the course and when to evolve. They understand that the difference between a business that continues to stay ahead of the curve and one that fades out is the ability to change while staying true to what makes them different. But of course, that's easier said than done. In a world where we are bombarded with content and marketing from businesses and brands, how do you make sure that yours stand out? How do you create something that lasts? And how do you build a brand that stays relevant, not just today, but for years to come? This is exactly what we explore on this episode of Edit History. Our guest today is Jasmine Haitalani, who is the Marketing and Creative Director of Highflier Powerhouse, a creative agency that specializes in guiding service-based entrepreneurs through rebranding and creative direction. With a focus on helping brands stand out in their industries and become number one in their niche, Jasmine brings a fresh and sometimes untraditional approach to creativity and marketing. If you're an entrepreneur, creative, or someone trying to make a name for yourself in a crowded niche, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Jasmine, you started your agency business in 2020, and I feel like I'm sure that, since 2020, there were many times when you had to evolve or shift in different ways. But what I'm super curious about is what was that first moment like when you realized that you needed to make certain business decisions, not just because you wanted to, but because you needed to in order to stay relevant?
Yeah, such a good question. I think naturally being in the creative design space, the first moment that I wanted to really experiment with a lot of things was obviously with my brand, with my visuals, with how I wanted to show up on Instagram. And that felt very easy for me to do, to just go into like a design application, change some things around, change my whole vibe. And as a result of that, I think because I kept allowing myself to do that, I noticed that that was translating into, oh, what software do I want to use? What platform do I want to work on? What system? Like it was almost distracting myself with the minute busy work. And at the same time, I noticed that filtered into, oh, do I want to change my niche? Do I want to change my offerings? Do I want to change, what I'm focusing on? Do I want to change my package pricing? And I quickly realized that consistently changing things around in that way to that point was only serving as a distraction. It wasn't allowing someone to also build that trust and authority with me over time, because I was showing up as a completely new business every, 2 weeks or so. And I think that also didn't allow me to stick with something long enough to truly see, is this actually working, or is there something else involved there? So I think it was kind of me looking for that next dopamine hit, me thinking that if I didn't get a sale after a week of selling something, that something was wrong and I needed to change everything immediately, before kind of just grounding myself a little bit more and saying, okay, there is, as a business, I have to decide to go with one thing, implement a strategy, and then decide what decisions and what changes I want to make only after I've given it really enough time for it to see if it works, for people to get to recognize it, for people to be familiar with it, and for me to build my reputation off of it.
That's such a good point. I do think that a lot of folks, they flip-flop very, very quickly just because it's been 2 months and they don't see the results that they want, but they haven't really let the timeline run its course to really let the results compound. So looking back, what were some things that maybe you perhaps flip-flopped on, and what were some things that you have now stuck with and you've seen the results compound?
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's so easy to see sales and, client consistency and success from somebody, and you think that that's how it's always been. So to that point, when I think back on the first year, or I would say, yeah, like year and a half that I started my business, I was flip-flopping around between offerings and like my product suite. So what did I want to sell? And it was mainly because to that point, I would either sell something for not a long enough period of time for it to see if it's truly working, if it's packaged correctly, if I'm marketing it correctly, if it's priced correctly. And then also the second thing was, I was always also wanting to sell new things all the time because I was getting bored of selling the same thing over and over again, right? I ran out of ideas or I felt stuck and I wanted, again, something new, something different. Especially being a creative, I kept thinking that if I felt stuck with my creativity instead of challenging myself and pushing myself further, I thought it was a problem and I always needed to find an outlet to be creative. So my first year, I remember with my kind of offer suite, I started with just website design. And then I was like, oh, I want to do branding and website. And then I was like, oh, let me do this whole full package. Oh, let me do this mini package. Let me do a launch package. Let me do a mini site package. And like before you know it, and I think this is also what happens when you're trying to really get anybody through the door and you're like, oh, well, if I have 10 offers, those are 10 different types of clients I can cater to. But we don't think about, well, how consistently could I be, marketing these 10 offers? And how consistently is someone going to recognize me from all 10 offers? And how am I able to work with a variety of clients if I have 10 different ways to serve them? So those are all the questions or like kind of hesitations that I started seeing. And I remember clearly going into 2021 being like, nope, we're going to just stick with one core offer that I really want to get good at. And funny enough, it's the offer that I still have today and it's evolved into like what the Rebrand Experience is. But I have been selling that same offer, essentially evolved, reiterated to fit the current market, really for almost like 4 years now, which is very wild to think about. But because of that, I've been able to think of more ideas, find niche ways to answer client objections and get creative with the marketing of it all.
And the thing about that offer that you're referring to, I think what stood out to me as like a follower of yours is how every year or like every iteration it gets even more impressive.
Yeah.
So that's something that I want to deep dive into in a second. But for right now, for the audience who's thinking, but like 4 years, that's a long time. Like how long do I know when it's working or when it's not working? Like what would you say to someone who's questioning like what timeline they should give themselves?
Yeah, I'll go through the same process that I kind of walked myself through. And I kind of put it on the table in terms of what is the offer that I feel like answers and addresses all of the needs that my clients have. So it's also asking yourself from a standpoint, is my offer packaged correctly? Is it priced appropriately for the type of, buyer I'm trying to attract? And then I truly think like you need at least 6 months of really giving something your all. And especially if you're not distracted, if you're working with experts, if you're seeking all of that, I think that's enough time before realizing like, okay, I need to make some fundamental changes. I need to turn some things around. And especially like I say this because also there are a lot of new business owners where the first month or two, really, you're just learning how to talk about the offer with confidence. You're just learning how to reach the right people. And so I think, anywhere between 4 to 6 months is more than enough time for you to experiment with a variety of things. But it's also about, to that point, are you showing up? Are you being consistent? Are you finding creative ways to talk about the offer? Are you doing lead generation? And to that point, if you're getting $0, zero sales from that, then I think it's time to think of a different strategy or a different approach. But that's the kind of the setup that I created for myself. And I said, hey, if nothing happens with this offer in 6 months, in 4 months, I'm going to make some changes or I'm going to add another offer. I'm going to switch some things around. And I think focusing on one thing could be immensely helpful to, again, eliminate those distractions and eliminate, yourself from overthinking and tinkering with things.
You know what? I think this is a really great segue into the piece of content that we're going to take a look at today. And this one is a bit different from our other conversations because this one already is a case study in itself. So I just pulled up your post on my browser here. And for the audience, we will be showing this on the video version of this podcast. So feel free to tune in on YouTube to check out this post. But I'm looking at your post right now. And what this post is essentially a timeline or a case study of the different versions of your signature offer, the Rebrand Experience. Could you maybe in your own words kind of give the audience just a brief rundown of the different evolutions that this offer has gone through?
Yeah, so it kind of started off with like what my original offering was in 2020, which is basically like website only design. And to that point about giving it the time for me to sell it, to market it, it's also about realizing when every client used to, start working with me, my end result was always like, how can I learn from this? And what were the issues that I faced that are either worth implementing changes into within the offer, or maybe changes that I need to, improve on myself. So with that, I started noticing that, okay, I got my first sale with this first iteration of the offer, but here are all the issues that I ran into that I might want to consider. And once another client, came in and I ran into the same issues, I was like, okay, this is going to be a consistent issue where, for example, people didn't have branding, they just wanted a website. And I felt like I was creating things from scratch because there was no direction. So with that, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to, like, how do I want to fix this problem? Am I willing to continue putting myself in this position, or do I want to add something? And that took me to like the first true iteration of this branded offer, which is like essentially branding and website design. So, worked on selling that, and then ran into a new issue where, okay, now we're missing key photography and visual creative direction. Clients are coming to us with existing photos, but they don't align with the vision that we have for them, the strategy that we have for them. And we can build the most beautiful website, but if the imagery, which is really like the first impression, isn't standing out, they're missing out on conversions. Things still feel disconnected. They're not being able to create content, cohesively with that. And so I was like, okay, that's another issue. Am I willing to deal with that? Or am I willing to, iterate it into something else? Is this a need in the market? So that's when we added photo, creative direction. That was, I would say, like the last core change before what we did this year, which is implementing marketing and content strategy into the mix. But we've made some few tweaks here and there in terms of deliverables and client experience stuff, system stuff on our end. But that essentially is the core evolution. It's always been, how can this offer remain relevant and competitive in today's market based off of like what the clients, what our clients need, and also what everyone else is offering at the same time.
I feel like what really resonated with me from what you just shared is how every tweak, I guess you could say, or every all the upgrades that you've done to your signature offer is based on actual like observations of client problems, instead of just thinking like, oh, like my messaging is off, but you really are basing it off of actual like tangible problems that your clients are running into, and that's how you base your decisions off of. And now that I'm looking at this case study post again, for you in the earlier offers that you had, you were clearly doing something right. Like you were clearly positioning yourself as the only option, if anything, even since the very beginning. So looking back, like what do you think you did right? Like what made it work back then?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. Number one, I think visually, I really did something disruptive, different for the current time. I talk about this, rebrand on my own podcast a lot, but like it was going with this all black, dark look when at the time everything was very minimalist, boho, light, airy feel. So I think visually, like that was the first kind of disruptive, oh, that's interesting, that's different. Second, I think to that point about, we're talking a lot about content. I was very vocal with what I believed about my niche, how I believed clients should be served, how I believed design and marketing contributed to sales, contributed to someone's business. Whereas a lot of people, again, in my industry were either replicating similar content strategies or they weren't putting out any thought leadership at all. So naturally, I already positioned myself as someone who is, well thought out, innovative. I get a feel of what the process is versus just the step by step or just the checklist of deliverables. I'm actually seeing how Jasmine's brain works and how her brain would ideally work with me and my business. So I think those are the two things that were very powerful in terms of allowing me to stand out and to just even get someone curious enough to be like, I haven't seen this before. I haven't heard this before. let me like see what this is all about and if this is for me.
Have you always identified as someone who has a different perspective or like a different opinion or is very creative? Or was it something that you struggle with but you had to build and hone in on? Like what was your experience with creativity or identifying as a creative person?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think it depends on the era of my life. I feel like maybe I was a little more rebellious, but I think I was always shy, quiet, introverted. I mean, immigrated to the US in high school at a time where I feel like everyone knew each other already. It was like my junior year. I felt like I had a lot of trouble fitting in, and at the same time, because I was so shy and quiet, it was just like to myself. I was, a bio major in college, so also was very the silent, quiet type for the most part. And I wouldn't say I was very like extroverted, socially out there, anything like that. But to that point, I feel like entrepreneurship gave me that first peek at what the identity could be because it felt like I could kind of reinvent myself and like go back to who I've always been. And with that, I think one thing about this is like being a creative gave me the confidence to express myself out there because I had so many opinions, standards, and thoughts on that. And I remember when entering the industry, I still felt like that reservation of, oh, I see everybody doing this and I'm going to try to do that. But then something again wasn't working. I kept feeling like I was forcing myself to do things simply because of what other people were doing, not because I genuinely believed that they would work. And it's kind of like building that self trust with yourself, right? So it's just saying yes to the first idea that might pop into mind, saying yes and, training your body to say yes to those gut instincts and just being like, I wonder what would happen if I did XYZ. So I think it started with, I wonder what would happen if I decided to change my offer a little bit. I wonder what would happen if I rebranded to this all black look. And as I slowly like said yes to those gut instincts, I think that's where the confidence, came about, grew. I started wanting to be more outspoken because I saw the shift that did for me. And so similarly, like I think that's why I'm so passionate about rebranding is because I feel like it unlocks this version of you who's always been there, but now you get to outwardly express.
I feel like what I'm hearing and observing also from the point of view of a follower of yours is that you're really capitalizing on a lot of your strengths. Creativity, like looking at data, making calculated decisions. Like I feel like you're really someone who leverages your strengths and do it really well. And not to mention, you have like phenomenal client case studies to show for. So one thing that I would love to segue into is, did you always know that these were your superpowers?
Oh,
Or was it something that you kind of like uncover, or was it something that like someone said like, oh, you're really good at this, and you're like, oh, really? Like, how did you realize these were your gifts?
really good question. To that point, I think I'm just realizing how all of this clicks. And, I think when people also find out that I was in STEM in college, they're like, oh, I see where you're blending both of the things together. Because I'm very systems oriented and very organized. And normally you would think like, because you're creative, you maybe are creative, but then you're like a little bit of a mess everywhere else. And I think I blend the best of both worlds, if I do say so myself. But I I think it actually just starts with to that point what I was saying earlier about like challenging yourself to figure it out. I think to that point when we're marketing online, when we have access to everything at our fingertips to be able to change our offer, to be able to, get support, be able to get like the secret formula to something, we think that's immediately going to be the fix. And if I think back on when I decided to stick to one offer and really figure out a way to make it work, it goes back to like a lot of times we get to this level where it is going to be a little harder because you've said everything or you've done everything, and you do have to push a little bit beyond that to get a little more creative. And so many people in that moment just get frustrated and decide to change something entirely. And I think those are the moments where I decided to like keep going, keep pushing, keep ideating, that got me to this like unlocked level of potential, of skill set, of a different way to think about things, of an introduction to a new opportunity. So it's like, how often are you pushing a little bit beyond the comfort levels? Because I think so often when you're growing your business, you push and then you get comfortable again. And then so many of us, especially when we're getting consistent clients and making the revenue that we love, we stay in that comfort level. And I've been a part of that too. And it's so easy to just stay there and not decide to evolve. But from what I've seen, I think quickly that could end up, you know, going against yourself, and you end up getting too comfortable. And by the time you are ready to evolve, it's a little too late and you already feel like everyone else kind of beat you to it, or now you have to do twice the work to get back out there.
And I feel like this ties in really nicely with how you often talk about that's why people stop engaging
Right.
with businesses. That's why people quit entirely. That's why people they become irrelevant essentially.
Yeah.
Um, are there any non-business examples that come to mind when you think of a brand or business that has stopped becoming relevant because they stayed in their comfort zone?
Oh, Victoria's Secret. I mean, that's like kind of the first thing that comes to mind. I love to do to that point, like brand case studies on that. And an example of a brand that kind of reinvented themselves and have made themselves relevant is probably Abercrombie. And so when I think about like Victoria's Secret, they got a lot of lashback around what their brand ideology was and what their focus was. And then when they tried to make the changes to be more inclusive, be more diverse, be more body positive, they didn't implement it in the best way. And people saw and like read between the lines of, you're just doing this for publicity and it's not because you actually care about this. And so even though they are doing all of these changes, people could see the between the lines and they're like, it's a little too late. We already have different brands that we've been shopping at that we've loved. We kind of forgot about you. And they did, I remember, last year they did the fashion show all over again, and people didn't feel like it made a difference. And so I'm pretty sure they're in a position now where they're like, what do we need to do in order to get people to see us as this like, a dominant competitor in the market essentially. And when I compare that to like a brand like Abercrombie, which again was known for this very like frat boy, hot, you know what I mean? They had a completely different aesthetic, and now they're being reintroduced as this like closet staple, great for capsule wardrobe, great for wear for corporate. Like you would never think I can get 9 to 5 outfits from Abercrombie. And so they've done it in a completely different way where they could have easily gone out of business a couple of years ago, and they've completely reinvented themselves and have had like phenomenal success as a result of that.
I can completely attest to the Abercrombie example because there were years when I stopped going to the store, but literally just last week, I was visiting Canada and there was an Abercrombie store and I walked in and I went to the men's section and I found this like baseball hat and it said I think it was like On the Rocks Cocktail Lounge. And I was like, oh, that's such a like it was just a very nice, classy design, a navy baseball hat. And I got it for myself. And this is something that I don't think that they would have sold like years ago, back when they were like really hyped up, like in the
Hmm.
2010s or
Right.
2000s. But I can see that they have reinvent themselves over the years, and I think they've done it really well. And I'm back again years later shopping there again.
Right. And I think you would see how it like also fits into this current era of your life, and how, if any shop at this stage had shirtless men out there to try to attract you in, it would not read well today. So you would immediately be like, this is weird. I would never shop here. And so it just doesn't work anymore. And so that's like a good example.
Where do you get your inspiration from? Because I feel like you're someone who gets a lot of your creativity and inspiration from outside of the industry. So what are some like completely not like what would surprise people to know about your sources of inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I've always mentioned this, and this goes into like our creative inspiration as well. I try to always look at outside the box, other brands, other niches, magazine covers, things like that, and try to apply it. And I think that's just, if we think about any entrepreneur, most of the time when they started their business, they're usually applying something that they've learned from somewhere. So this is kind of like with my Kendra Scott experience, trying to translate it into business just to see how can I get the base of things up and running. And similarly with like inspiration like that, what could we learn from Abercrombie? What could we learn from Victoria's Secret, right? It's like, okay, Victoria's Secret, if you are making massive, messaging changes, but everything else looks visually the same, people won't see that as a change. People won't resonate. People won't find the connection point, right? So I think that's like a lesson to learn and apply. And so I think it's similar to the niche that you're in, or, maybe previous experiences that you've had. How are you applying that experience here, and where are you staying up to date on things that are happening again outside of your immediate industry, but you can apply to what it is that you're doing currently? So maybe it's new frameworks, methods, studies. I again lean more pop culture just because it's I think like the most creative touch point. But I know people that lean into like art and again a different type of art. People that lean into music. Something that I've been like kind of looking into as well is okay, when artists put out tours, how do they sell that? And like, what can we learn from that? When, celebrities do like, product drops and, they just do it all of a sudden and it sells out. Why does that happen? What is like, I think it's just asking questions and getting curious and deciding like, what can you take from that? What lessons can you learn from that? And how do you want to apply it?
If someone were to hack into your Instagram account, Jasmine, and they were to look at your discovery feed, what would they see? Like what what's
Should we pull, let's see, let's try to pull that up right now. Okay. So right now, what I'm seeing, okay, glam bot stuff from the Grammys. So
Mhm.
there's that. I'm seeing a lot of, to that point, thought leadership, a lot of photo shoot inspo, a lot of stuff from other like brand campaigns. So I'm seeing this collaboration that this wardrobe brand did with, I don't know if you know who Corporate Natalie is from TikTok. She's just this, person who used to do corporate 9 to 5 content and now she's a full-time creator. But they did this workwear brand. Essentially, it's like 9 to 5 attire and they collaborated with her. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I really, to that point, I really like collaborations and things like that. I'm also seeing things from Lunar New Year, seeing things from this is Vanessa Lau's Boba brand. So different things like that, but it's not all to that point. If I'm in the design niche, you would think it's all like mood boards and font selections and inspiration. And that only keeps me, I feel like, so confined into what I can dream up versus, when I'm consuming content that even it's outside of my niche, I'm always like, ooh, how can I take that into what it is that I'm doing or what I'm doing with my clients? And I think people are really looking for that. They're looking for individuality and a way for you to like customize the way you're showing up.
Yeah, and I think you're someone who really exemplifies that. And I feel like I feel like I've heard you say like it's like you cannot like not you can't afford not to do this, right? Otherwise you'll literally become irrelevant. So was there ever a time where you were consuming a lot from the industry?
Mhm.
Like, was there ever a time when you feel like, yeah, I like, not gonna lie, I did let the industry that I'm in influence a lot of the things that I share or the body of work that I was building? Was there ever a time like that for you?
Yes, I think when I think back again on that 2021 era, um, it was really, it was challenging because I had made to that point the decision to stick with selling one offer, only do XYZ things, position myself in this way. And it's very tempting. Like, it's very tempting to see things, and especially when you're like waiting on a result, there's so many influences to be like, oh, just try this, just do that, try this out for 30 days, see if it works, try to like, change this. It's kind of like when you're on a diet, but you're seeing everybody consume like fast food and chocolate and sweets and things like that. And you're like, oh, what if I just tried a bite here and tried that there? So I think that was, a time, and it's also very easy to create content from that position where you see something that you don't agree with and you immediately create content bashing the other thing to try to like bring yourself up. And I think I maybe have done that like once or twice, and I didn't like how that made me feel, or I didn't like that I had to put someone down and make myself look better. Um, Not that I tagged anyone or anything, but it was like, don't do this. This is bad. Like, do this instead. Instead, I'm like, hey, this works when you're in this scenario. If you want to be in that scenario, if you want these results, this is what works instead. And so it's like, yes, there is value here, but here's where the value applies more to you. And so I just learned to develop with that. And to that point, I think that's why now I'm very unbothered and don't really look at what top people are doing. And if I do and when I do, it's purely from a how are they thinking about the industry currently, or how are they making fundamental changes? Because there is, I think, something to learn from people that have been in the industry for 15, 20 years, and all of that. So I think there's, again, always a page to be taken out, but keeping the boundaries in terms of how you want to apply that.
Yes, yes. Okay, here's another very nosy question. So, looking back, there were maybe some things that you have learned from past Jasmine and things that you would be a lot more tasteful about now. But right now, as of present day, what would you say your current weakness is? Or things that you're working on for yourself?
Yes, good questions. Weakness, oh, definitely like decision making. Like if it's not a heck yes in my body, I will overthink it for quite some time. To that point about being data driven, I could be a little bit of a perfectionist. I sometimes go a little over the top with analyzing all of the things and all of the ways in which something can go wrong. And if there are like 100 ways that this can go wrong, are we prepared for the 100 ways that could go wrong? And a lot of times last year, that's where it would stop me from making a decision, not because genuinely it was a bad idea, but because I would get too lost in the decision making that it would take me months before I said yes to something. So a lot of the ideas that I plan on implementing, especially in the first 6 months of 2025, are things that I just have been sitting on for over a year. And I think to that point, it's just deciding what you want to move with, and making decisions from there. So to that point, I know that there are a lot of people that find us as influential and impactful and like look up to us for certain things. So I've been trying to also do this on my podcast and in my content, where I have been trying to do more things in public and sharing the decisions along the way, the process along the way, kind of like what I did with the campaign that we did. I was sharing like, here's my goal, here's what I'm doing, here's where this didn't work out and how I'm turning it around, here's where I'm fixing it. So I think that was also a little bit of a weakness of mine, is like being a little bit more open. Um, and, I think it doesn't, I used to think that could make me appear like not respected or not valued, or that, I don't know how to do things. Versus I think people, again, are more interested in like my thought process and my insight along the way. So I think those are things that I'm really hoping to practice more this year.
That last part about like that balance between like relatable slash approachable versus um like aspirational, like you know what you're doing. So it sounds like previously you were leaning more towards having that like polish, I guess maybe that might be the word
Yeah,
to
yeah.
use.
Mhm.
But right now, like what would you say your like what's the most on-brand balance for you? Is it like 30% approachable, 70% like this is my
Yeah.
thought leadership? Like what's your balance or what's the
Funny
most
that
on
you
brand?
mentioned that. Like my personal brand framework is like, here's the dissection. So it's like 60% thought leadership in your niche. It's 30% like sharing your genius, your insight in other contexts. So, like sharing the behind the scenes of my campaign, like when I do celebrity case studies, it's like, again, sharing my expertise, but in a way that's not direct to my offers or my niche. And then 10% of it is like relatability that's has nothing to do with anything. And I'm very intentional about that. I know some people love to lead with more life stuff and day-to-day things and all of that, but at the end of the day, it is a business. So I think that's kind of a really good split that I have found that allows me to do everything and share everything in like the right amount. And when we think about it, you're like, oh, only 10% or only 30%. That doesn't sound like a lot. But when we're thinking about the amount of content that we're creating, I'm like, okay, if you're creating 10 posts a month, that's like three of those posts. So that's already, a good fraction. So.
What would you describe as your body of work? Because some people might think of it as like, oh, it's my podcast. Some people might think like, oh, it's my LinkedIn profile. Like
Mhm.
in your own eyes, what is your body of work?
I think if I had to express outwardly, and this wasn't always the answer, it would probably be our portfolio. Like, I'm very proud of the journey that we've taken each of those clients through and what we've been able to create. Um, I would say that if I'm thinking about marketing channel, very, I've been sharing a lot of my like frameworks and concepts on my podcast, and I love how my brain has been able to shift into more of an educational route in that way. Internally, hands down, I would say like our client process and experience. I know what we have is like very unique to probably how other agencies onboard, offboard clients handle team stuff. And to that point, like we are just as innovative internally as we are externally. I think that's something that I think before our portfolio, that was definitely something that was like, I felt very, very proud of having. And it was like my best kept thing.
Looking ahead, do you think there's anything else you would be adding to your body of work, or like there's any like ways you're going to expand this like repertoire? Or do you think like your portfolio is still the bread and butter of your body of work moving forward?
I would like to that point, I think it will remain, but I want to that point, I think with this new direction, with this level up, I'm kind of like, what do people want to see from our portfolio that we haven't necessarily updated in quite a while? And it works, right? And people are still able to capture the essence of the brand, but it's kind of like, how, speaking of outside, I'm like, how can this be like a magazine that people just like love flipping through and see again, like ads and campaigns, but it's really our clients. And I think that's what's been next up is just maybe displaying that in a different way, adding more to the case studies beyond just the visual component, having articles. Um, that would be something like very interesting if someone could like get that, download that, get it in their inbox, read through it. And that's an idea that I've actually been sitting on as well, is like I would love to print that and like mail it to our clients as well. So I think, just helping them see themselves in a different light, different aspect. So to that point, I think maybe just innovating the next version of what that might look like.
How have you yourself seen yourself in a different light since building this agency, since diving into this creative direction work? Like, what has been the most profound realization about yourself over these years?
That I probably can handle or like overcome more than I give myself credit for. I think to that point, especially when there are challenging times in business, when you're overthinking things, when you're thinking about, you know, changing something completely, I forget that like, entrepreneurs, like we start businesses from scratch. So like that is the hardest part of it all, is like deciding to go all in and deciding to just plant something from the ground up. So I think that's like a consistent reminder that I've been able to develop and create and overcome so much in and out of my business that, you know, I have to like remind myself consistently that, you know, it's gonna be fine, and you're able to like get creative and think your way through it, or think yourself through the problem and overcome like what you're facing.
Do you think the Jasmine in 2020 would have been able to foresee what you've built
Oh
today as
gosh.
a 2025?
No.
Like
No,
what would past Jasmine say if like she knew?
um I definitely like I think my worst, not my worst fear, but I did have the thought of what if this doesn't work out and I have to like reapply to med school as a last resort? Like I don't know. I don't know if I want to do that. I have put like, oh, if this doesn't work out and I have to go back to a 9 to 5. Funny enough, I didn't start thinking that way until things started opening back up again. A lot of businesses, I think also around 2021, 2022, like they were like, hey, like I realized that this was just a side gig for me. I want to go back to a job now. And in that moment, I think when I started seeing a lot of people go, I was like, is this temporary? And I sometimes still think that, like, I don't know what the next version of my business in 3 years and 5 years is going to look like, and what offers I'm going to be delivering and all of that. So, to that point, I think it's just walking myself through, and you'll figure it out, and you'll get the data, and you'll see the market, and you'll see how things evolve. And to that point, I think that's why I'm so passionate about like creating that self-trust and creating that really that instinct with yourself to say yes to more of like the ideas and the changes that you can make now, so that when you are in a position where you literally have to make a choice, it's not foreign to you to, you know, kind of embrace that change and be able to like work through it.
Amazing, amazing. Alrighty, Jasmine. And where can the people find you and or work with you if they want to find you after
Yeah,
this?
you can find us at our agency's website, social media, all of the things at Highflier Powerhouse. You can also listen to my podcast called Brand Your Way to a Million. It's where I share a lot of like my concepts, insights, all of the things. It's probably my most creative outlet. And I'm sure, you know, Cheryl will link all of those below, but that's where you can find me.
Amazing. Alrighty, people. Thank you so much for listening. And I will see you in the next segment of this episode where we will recap some of the takeaways that you can walk away with and implement in your own work starting today. Thank you so much. As we discussed in this conversation, in order to stay relevant, your offers, products, and services need to evolve with your clients' needs and shifts in the market. But what about your content? Because here's the thing, if your content isn't evolving, your audience, they're already moving on. So let's talk about two things to consider as you continue to sharpen your content skills and stay relevant in your industry. First, are you saying anything new? So ask yourself this, am I actually bringing something fresh to the conversation, or am I just adding to the noise, right? And right now we are in an era where there is a lot of recycled content, the same ideas that are just being repackaged in similar ways over and over again. And it's really too easy to fall into that trap of just doing what supposedly works and copying the frameworks that got engagement in the past. But here's the problem. A lot of what used to work, it's simply not landing anymore. Audiences are sharp and intelligent, right? They can tell when you're just repurposing content without adding anything new. And they're going to start scrolling past your content and stop engaging. And I've seen this happen even with the people I used to follow religiously, right? I realized I just wasn't opening their emails anymore. I wasn't watching their videos, not because they weren't great at what they do, but because I already knew what they were going to say. They kind of became predictable, right? And in a world where attention is supposedly the most valuable currency, predictable content is just not going to cut it anymore. All right, the second thing, are you just copying and pasting your content across platforms? Because here's the thing, every platform has its own culture, its own language, its own audience behavior, but too many people take the easy route and they just turn a long form video from YouTube into a LinkedIn post and maybe slap on a selfie and that's it, right? But think about it. Why do people go on to LinkedIn? Right? They're there to make connections, explore business or career opportunities, and learn from industry leaders. So if your content doesn't match that expectation, it's not going to resonate. And that's why content creators shouldn't just repurpose, but you really need to think about how you can reframe and reshape your message to match the expectations of each platform's specific audience. And that's how you stay relevant. All right, so here's your homework. If your content is feeling a little repetitive, well, your audience might stop paying attention, not just on one platform, but across the board. So ask yourself this, am I delivering something that people actually want to engage with? And am I showing up with fresh ideas, or am I just kind of coasting on what worked 6 or 12 months ago? And if your answer is, maybe there is some room for improvement, good. Right? That's a good thing, because now it means that there is time and opportunity to shake things up. So let's go back to the drawing board, re-engage your creative muscle, and start creating content that doesn't just get you seen, but actually makes people stop, pay attention, and take action. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work. One more thing. If you thoroughly enjoyed this episode and are eager to continue the work, I would love to recommend you to grab the Podcast Content Audit. This is a resource I've crafted to help you audit 9 different parts of your podcast content strategy and identify the specific areas that you can improve on right away to start setting your podcast apart from the rest. The Podcast Content Audit follows our signature framework to building a differentiated and timeless body of work by number 1, becoming known for your thought leadership, number 2, creating immense value for your audience, and number 3, developing your signature voice. You can get the Podcast Content Audit at CherylLao.com/audit. Again, the link is CherylLao.com/audit. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work.